3, 2, 1. There we go.
I'm calling her out too.
All right, well, we're recording, so thank you again, everybody. We're going to be going over how to use Slack, how Whole Washington uses Slack. And I'm going to start by dropping a document in the chat. So this is a resource that I created that explains how to use Trello and Slack and a little bit more about how they're set up. So, you know, if there's anything that's unclear today, you can always check the document. And if there's anything that's unclear on the document or anything that you think should be included, please just go ahead and leave a comment or get in touch with me, and I'll keep it updated because I want to make sure that, you know, the more people who provide feedback on it, the better of a resource it can be for everybody. So with that said, let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so cool. Here's the document. It's got a section for Slack and Trello. But the first thing that you'll see is this URL is a way, sorry, not that one. This URL is a way that you can join the Slack without having to be invited or getting in touch with anybody. So the first thing you'll need to do in order to use Slack with us is you'll need to be added, you'll need to join it. Somebody can add you to it, but this link is the way that you can do it yourself. So if you click it, it should take you through a setup process. In my case, I'm already added. So you can see that that link has just opened Slack for me. And I have to make sure I don't show any private communication or anything because I use a lot of Slacks. But what I would say is the first thing to understand is that Slack is sort of an organizational tool. And so one of the important UI elements, is this left-hand bar where your organization will have its server represented. So you can see that mine has Whole Washington here on the left. It's the second one. And if you're only in one Slack, you might not see this at all. But a lot of different activist organizations use Slack. So that's why it's organized in this way. So I'll go ahead and click on it. And now we're in Whole Washington Slack. And I'll just go to this general room for a start. So Slack is organized into different what are called channels. And a channel is essentially just a chat room. You can see here in the upper right-hand corner that this general channel has 283 people in it. And I'm one of them, and a lot of you are probably in there as well, or will be if you, this is probably one of the default ones you get added to when you join the Slack. So any message that I send in here will be sent out to the entire room. And so this is a really good way where you can just start to meet people. Can we make sure everyone's muted, please? But also, please let me know if you have any questions. We don't have to, we can take questions at any time. But anyway, so you can start sending messages to this channel, and that will be a really good way for you to get connected with people that maybe you haven't even met. Maybe you don't even know that you need to meet. You know, the point is to get everyone in this big organization that we have into a common platform so that we can start to make those connections. So that's basically, you know, using it for general messaging. You'll see that each of these messages, it doesn't show, like it's trying to encourage us to consider these separate conversations. So like, has anyone tossed together an agenda for tonight's meeting? It has the replies hidden in what's called a thread. So if you hit view thread, you'll be able to see on this right-hand side the rest of that conversation. And this provides a way for people to have conversations in this general channel without constantly creating new notifications. If you're involved in this thread, you'll get the notifications when people respond. But if you're somebody who didn't didn't get involved in this thread, then you don't need to see all the notifications for the response. So if you want to respond to a thread, right, instead of just responding to the entire room, you can go here and say reply to thread. And that's how you will get involved in this sub conversation. So you're encouraged to do that and try to keep your communication specific to the context that's interested in it. And this is a way that will all reduce the amount of messaging we have to stay on top of, is if we sort of target our messaging to the correct context. So that's basically how channels and threads work. You can go ahead and right click on any of these channels and you'll be given the option to star it. So if these are, if there's a channel where you're connecting with people that are most involved with the work you do, or are more specific to your concerns, you can star it and then it'll appear in this starred section. So I'm involved in a few of these different channels, and the starred one just helps me keep track of that. You can also just browse the entire list of channels. So it's a little bit counterintuitive here, but down here where it says add channels, if you want to just see what channels are available, you can go ahead and click it and go browse all channels. And so here you'll basically be able to see a list of all of the channels that Whole Washington uses. You'll be able to see how many members are in them, and you'll be able to join and situate yourself inside. You can also search, right? So maybe you're wondering like, you know, I work in marketing and how could I get involved? You could just search for marketing and see. We don't have any channels called that, but maybe merchandise or something like that. Merch store, right? And then that could be one that you join. So this is a way for you to sort of see how we're organized, is to explore this channel and find the place that that is, you know, related to your concerns, right? So maybe you go into the outreach channel and you can just start asking, you know, what outreach campaigns are going on right now? How can I get involved? The other thing you'll notice when you go into some of these channels, not all of them, but this one is logging a lot of Trello activity. So we basically have created sort of working groups, if you will, where they have their own Slack channel and their own Trello. And so we're trying to sort of create some connectivity between them. So basically, if you go to this project management channel, you'll see all of the Trello updates across our entire organization. And that's a lot of information, and it's not necessarily all stuff that you're interested in, but it's how you can really see what's going on. And then you'll start to get a better sense of how these working groups are organized in both Slack and Trello. So, you know, you can kind of see Mark has joined the board outreach, right? And so that will take you to the Trello board that's involved in outreach. And likewise, that outreach Trello has a corresponding Slack channel. So I think if you go over here and you hit Slack, maybe not Slack. Yeah, so you can see that this Trello board is hooked up to outreach and project management. So what that means is there is an outreach channel, and this channel also has these Trello updates, but only for the outreach Trello. So I hope this is clear. It sounds kind of like a lot. Let me
So
maybe show it one other way.
Can I ask?
Yes.
So does every, oh, wait. So each one of those things is called a Slack channel, and then Slack, the thing for your whole group that includes all those channels, what's that called?
Yeah, so I would call it the organization. The Whole Washington organization, or the Whole Washington server, has all of the channels.
So, and then does every organization that has a Slack organization or a Slack server, does every organization have that one called project management? And for all of them, all the Trello connected stuff will be on that one place, or did whole Washington choose to call it that and open that up and direct them there?
Whole Washington chose to organize it this way. So channels, you'll see, right? And I think you probably just start with 1 or 2 channels when you create an organization by default. So maybe like a general channel. Um, you know, I can just hit create a new channel and name it whatever I want. I don't know if you'll be able to do that if you join, because you might have to be made a Slack admin. But a lot of this is just the way I set it up. Trello is a separate tool. It's where we keep track of the work that we're doing and the work that needs to be done. So that's where you can start to find lists of things that need to be done. And so what we've done is we've linked them together. And so Trello is now logging its activity in this Slack channel. And then at the top, you'll see here, I've put a link to the Trello in the description of the channel. So that's how you know that this channel is mapped to that Trello board. And so if you go to Trello and you go to our organization and I hit boards, you'll see that we have 10 Trello boards, and I believe 9 of them, or maybe all 10. I think 9 of these boards they have a corresponding Slack channel. And so it's sort of, that's how you know, like, this is the work that I'm doing. And then here on Slack, these are the people that I'm working with. And this is how I can talk to them. So that's how I would think of the relationship between the 2 tools. The document explains how to use both of them. I'm looking at it now and realizing that this document needs more work. So please do get in touch with me with any questions that you have, because I realize I didn't really fill out the Slack section as much as it needs to be. But I want this to be a resource that really helps people feel like they have I want you to feel like you don't need help in order to figure out how to use all this. So anytime that that you're confused about something, it's because the self-help resources that I've made are currently insufficient. And so I'd like to really make them more robust so that really it can answer all the questions that you need. And that will help the most people be involved.
Andre, 1 second, if you don't mind me interjecting. So Betty and Mike are with One Pair States, and they don't have. I don't think One Pair States has Trello set up. So
Mike and I started to learn how to use it, but we did not actually go to it to actually use it. Like, I posted a few things on it, but we weren't in the habit and we just stopped. So no, One Pair States in general does not use it, but Mike and I did get a little training on it.
Okay.
okay.
So
Okay.
I definitely think that Trello is a pretty good tool for this kind of thing. And you can see this is one way it can be set up to work with Slack, but it's not, it's not necessary. You can keep track of that in a different system if you're more comfortable with that. But yeah, that is a good opportunity. I'll just say, right. So I've been showing you around whole Washington Slack, right? But One Pair States has its own Slack. And there are going to be crossover members in both. That's part of the point, right? So while many of the One Pair State organizations might have their own Slack, the One Pair States organization on Slack is sort of where all of those campaigns can come together and figure out ways that they can collaborate, even though they're in different states and are working on their own campaigns. So if I click on—
Wait a minute. I think I need you to say that again. I know I was distracted plugging in my computer because the battery was getting low, but I also think you just said something that was over my head.
Sure. So I was showing you whole Washington Slack, right? And that's the Slack that we use for our campaign and here in Washington. But basically you're a part of One Pair States, and One Pair States has its own Slack, right? So if you see here, I'm a member of that Slack as well. I can click on One Pair States. Now we're inside One Pair States' Slack, right? And that's the nice thing about Slack as a tool, is I can be in both of those Slacks and I'm a member of both of those organizations. And that provides, like, I can, I guess basically what I'm saying is this is a really good way for activists working on multiple campaigns and multiple organizations to collaborate, because you can have communication with different organizations within the same tool. So I use it for whole Washington and One Pair States.
So One Payer States has people from all these different states. And so, for instance, I don't necessarily need to have information about what Colorado is doing, but One Payer States has some people who would like to know what Colorado is doing. So would, for instance, our secretary, Mike,
Mhm.
have membership to all those different ones? And then those, like, how does it work? If One Payer States is this like coalition of all these different groups, I don't know if coalition is the right word, but we don't all need to belong to all of each other's. So
Correct.
how does that work?
So basically, for me as like an activist in Washington, it makes sense to be a part of whole Washington's and One Pair States.
Yeah.
I could, get in touch with the folks running campaigns in California or New York and say, hey, I'd love to be in your Slack too, and maybe they'd add me, right? But there's less of a reason for that, um, because there's less that I can really do. So what I would say is, people should be in the Slacks of the organizations that they feel are relevant to them and that, they want to be involved with.
So it's
Um,
person-based rather than organization-based. It's like for that individual person, which ones make sense?
Yeah. And
Okay.
basically there's not like One Pair States and Whole Washington are both just Slack organizations. There's not like the concept of like this is an umbrella organization that
Yeah,
involves
right.
this one. There's nothing like that. But you
Okay.
can see how it's really easy for me to use both. I just switched from Whole Washington to One Pair States as Slack. And so we can see here One Pair States has their channel set up differently. We can say browse channels. This one is a much smaller
Wait a minute.
Slack.
Can you show me what were you just doing? So you clicked on the, I guess it's a little bit small for my
Yeah.
vision here. You're in One Payer States right now?
I'm in
No.
One Pair States right now, right? So I got to One Pair States by clicking on this icon on the left-hand bar that says One Pair States, right?
Okay.
Whole
Okay.
Washington's up here, and then One Pair States is here.
Okay. I was
So-
thinking that it was going to be in the middle section at the top where it might
Nope.
say events right now, but it's at the left side. Okay.
Right. So each of these organizations has their own channels. And so now we can see One Pair States as channels: general, Medicare for all, state single payer. So like this organization, for instance, I'll just explain how it's set up a little bit. Medicare for all is for the national Medicare for all campaign, whereas state single payer is for the state-based campaigns. And so One Pair States, because it's a different organization than Whole Washington, has they have a different channel structure that meets the needs of that organization. It's also smaller and has fewer members, right? So if we say browse all channels, you'll see this is a very small list of channels right now. Whole Washington has a whole bunch because over the years, it's just accumulated them, and sometimes channels get created and they're used for a while, and then
How many people belong to Whole Washington?
well, let's see. If we go to Whole Washington, and we go to the general room, which pretty much everyone should be in, we have 283. Now, I think that's small for the size of our organization because we have multiple systems that people are in. So we have people who have volunteered to collect signatures, or people who
join Slack, right?
Right. We have people that mostly work with us through Facebook, right?
So
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. So I have a Slack, whatever it's called, membership or what account. And I had one that I started. I don't remember the first one. I know that during November, I joined one for calling for, I don't know, people in Pennsylvania or something. And then for the election, and then I was invited to join one for ranked choice voting, and I have One Pair States. So I belong to at least 3, and I get notifications intermittently. It's like sometimes I'll go for weeks without hearing from that one that I joined in November, and I'll suddenly get a little spate of them. But when I look at the window for Slack, I'm open up right now to One Pair States. I only see one.
Yeah. So this is one of the more complicated aspects of Slack, and maybe this is something that I need to tutorialize more. So the first thing is that you get added to an individual Slack. It's not like say Facebook, where you create a single account and then that becomes your account for the entirety of Facebook. You're going to be creating an account for each Slack that you're added to. And I recommend using the same email address in all of them because Slack has ways that make it so that you can basically get all of your Slacks with one email address. You don't have to use the same one, but I would recommend it.
Can you state that you created a different, what, account or channel, or what do you create for each different organization?
It's fair to say, I mean, you could call it a different account. Most of the time people would say like you're added to a Slack, like I need to be added to whole Washington Slack, but you'll be creating an entirely new account when you do that because each Slack has its own like user database. They're separate from each other. It's not like Facebook where everything is centralized into sort of one database of users. So yeah, once you have that,
Oh, I'm sorry.
so once you have an account on each organization's Slack, what this is showing that these are all the Slacks that I'm logged into. So I have to technically log into each one of these ones individually, and my login for whole Washington is not the same as my login for one pair of states. If I click add workspace, it will say sign into another workspace, and we can look at that screen, I think. Yeah, so what this one is saying, and this is why I say to use if you use the same email, it'll show you all the ones that you're signed into, and then you'll be able to say, okay, I want to open the one pair states one, and it will log you into that one. It's a little hard to demonstrate since I'm logged into all of them. I could maybe show you.
Do you usually stay logged into them like day after day, or do you like sign out of them at night, or like how do you decide whether you're logged into them all at the same time or not?
I usually stay logged into to all of them, even ones that I don't use that much. A lot of these ones are not very active Slacks. When I'm done, I usually just will say quit Slack completely. So down here, I right click and say quit, and then that'll close Slack. And that's when I just don't want notifications or anything. But yeah, I can quickly show you, if I sign out of one pair of states, I think it should have signed me out there. Okay, well, I wasn't expecting it to go blank like that. There we go. Yeah, so it kind of needed to reload its interface, but you'll see now I've signed out of one pair of states.
Okay.
And so if I wanted to get back in, I would click this plus here, add workspace, sign into another workspace, and then this screen is going to show me all of the workspaces that I'm a part of. And one pair of states should have been one of them. I might need to give it my email. Yeah, and then it usually does, I believe it will do this for you. So if you're not familiar with two-factor authentication, it's gonna email me a code. I I feel bad that I'm not gonna finish this demonstration, but I can't think of a way to do it. That actually, I can get it from my phone. I just didn't want to show everyone my email.
Betty, I did send you a direct message in Slack. Well, it was more of a comment on one of your comments. So if you can see that, let me know. And Mike, you've had your hand up for a while. Did you have a question?
Yeah, if we wanted to use Google Tables instead of Trello, would it work as smoothly?
It certainly could. What I would recommend if you were to use Google Tables is a similar setup where basically, I think the most important thing is that people on Slack can find the place where you're supposed to be organizing. So if I, go to this outreach room, what I did was I set this link here to that. So basically I would recommend linking to the Google table here and making sure that people in your organization look at the room description or the room topic, and that's where to find the work that is related to that room. In terms of getting an integration where it's like plugging notifications into the feed like this, that might exist. You could look around and see if somebody has made a little tool that will do that. Usually you need, a third-party integration to get this kind of connection between two tools. And in the case of Slack and Trello, though they're built in. So I could show you one of these days how I set that up. But I tend to think of that sort of thing as not deeply important. It's more important that you come up with a system and then make sure people know how it works, so that they feel like they know how to use the system and participate in it. I don't think it needs to be fancy. This is just one way to do it. And that's one of the nice things about the tools that we're showing here, Slack and Trello, is that they're both pretty flexible. But Google Docs is another very flexible and useful platform. We use it all the time. And there's lots of others out there. So, there's a whole nother conversation about sort of how to find a project management culture that works with your organization. And that depends on what people are comfortable with and how much threshold for complexity there is. But yeah, this is how we do it, and it's worked pretty well for us. So so I think, and the nice thing is increasingly people just sort of know these tools already. So I feel like they're becoming standard, and that's a good way to reduce how intimidating it is for people.
So we have started with Trello in One Pair States. And so it sounds like if we are to continue, we should develop that. I have another organization I'm working with that's already got a foundation in Google Tables. And I want to be able to add our local organization as one of the choices on Slack. And would it be confusing to have Mid-Valley Healthcare Advocates using Google Tables and One Pair States using Trello?
Well, basically, I don't think that would necessarily be too confusing. I do think that the more overlap there is between those two groups of people, the more it makes sense to standardize on one tool for project management. Because then you're basically asking some people to learn two systems. People who are involved in multiple organizations, I think, tend to have experience working within different systems, and maybe it's fine. But I do think that I do think that I try to standardize. I work with multiple organizations as well, right? And I find that standardizing helps me and allows. I mean, it's kind of nice to also build sort of an interoperability. Like for instance, in this case, we're talking about how One Pair States and Whole Washington both use Slack. If one of us was on Slack and the other one was on some other tool that didn't work with Slack, that would then increase the amount of work it is for us to collaborate.
Yeah.
So I think that there's value in standardizing.
Okay, thank you.
What was the other one you said? Google what?
Google Drive is it's like
Well, I
Google
know what
Docs.
Google Drive is, yeah, but
Google.
what was the name, Mike?
It's Google, I think Tables is the name of it, but it works with Google.
It might be Google Sheets. It's basically their Excel
Google Sheets, right.
alternative.
No, it's not Google Sheets. It's a program called Tables.
Oh, I'm less familiar with that, so I can't say as much. I was assuming you were talking about Google Sheets.
It's
but that was
Google's
my
version
mistake.
of Trello, and it's just out of beta. I think it's full on running now.
Yeah. So so that's actually interesting. I'll definitely be checking that out. Google makes some pretty nice services. I think Trello is pretty established, and so right now I might recommend Trello, but Google has a way of becoming its own standard. So that could be a tool that we hear more about in the years to come.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions that people have, or any other things that maybe they've had difficulty with on Slack or something that I could speak to? Yeah,
So I'm on my version of One Pair States Slack, and I don't see an option for me to add whole Washington. Do I need to be invited?
Yeah, so again, you'll need to be added to each one individually. And in the case of Whole Washington, we have ours set up so that you can add yourself using that link that I dropped at the
Oh, okay.
beginning. So if you go to the document, and I can show it again, and I can link it again if you need me to. Let's see, it's probably here. So this is the using Trello and Slack. This is a Whole Washington document, and you'll basically use this link, and it should walk you through the process of getting added. So I'll drop that in the chat one more time.
Okay. I
I
see
also,
it.
I've also put the link to our Slack directly in the chat as well. So
Okay.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and leave you to find that. Oops, I'm definitely sharing my screen still.
I have it.
I was in here. Cool. Any other questions?
You probably already said this, but it may have been about 5 or 10 things ago and I don't remember it. Sorry. So I'm looking at my One Pair States Slack,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering how to add the other ones. And when I see the there was a thing about adding a workspace. Where was that?
Yeah, so add workspace is at the bottom of this list. It's this plus sign.
Wait, where?
And
Let me look at the Zoom again. Okay, where?
yeah, I probably need some sort of some way to make my mouse pointer easier for you all to see. It's on the left-hand side.
Oh, I found where it says that add workplaces. When
Yeah, so-
I only have one thing right now, so it's like right at that place. It has a caret right next to it, and that's where I see it.
Mhm.
Okay, so I click on the add workplaces,
Yep.
and then it says sign into another workspace, create a new workspace, or find workspaces.
Mhm.
So I want to, if I do sign into another workspace, then
Yeah.
I want to be able to find one that I already belong to.
So yeah, if you do sign into another workspace, I believe you have to already be added to that one. So you probably, if you want to find one that you're not added to yet, you would need to do find workspaces, but that's not really how most people do it. You know, this is maybe going to, yeah, it's possible, but what I would say is usually the way most people get added is somebody will add them and you'll get an email invite, or
Yeah.
you'll use one of these links. Most people aren't going to find their Slack by using this find and then you know, finding it out in the world like that.
So how do I find where my other ones are?
So if you want to find all, okay, so you're trying to find the ones that you already are a member of, correct?
Yeah, I won't be able to do it today because I'll have to run downstairs and grab my passwords because I don't have them all memorized. But
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
wanted to
so-
at least like see where it is.
Yeah, so that would actually be sign into another workspace, and then it's going to ask you for your email address, and that will give you a list of the ones that you're a member of using that email address. If you've used multiple email addresses, you might have to do this multiple times because it's only going to be able to find the Slacks associated with the email address that you used.
Right,
And
I've used the same one for all of them. Yeah.
yeah, so you should be able to find them all that way. If you have trouble with that, I can help you, and I can figure out what's confusing about it and then try to make that clearer. But I think it should be relatively simple. But I sometimes can't tell because once you start to use these tools, they remember your settings and stuff. And so sometimes what I'm looking at isn't the same as what other people are looking at.
Andre, real quick, Carolyn had a question in the chat about what is better to use, the app or a browser, and I think that's a great question. I use the browser right now, but watching you use the app, I think I'm actually going to download the app and start using that instead because it looks way more manageable.
Yeah, so I tend to find that the browser is a little bit slow and heavy. I often prefer browsers for most of my stuff, but in the case of Slack, I would usually say that the app is a little better. It does look a little different on mobile, so a lot of the stuff that I'm showing you, it's conceptually the same, but you might have to, fumble around the UI a little bit to find out how to do it on mobile. But yeah, I would generally recommend the app, at least on Windows. But yeah, actually, even like I think the app, it works on Mac and Linux very well. So in general, the only time I really would use the browser sometimes is if I was on like a different computer or something and needed to quickly get into a Slack to do a little bit of work, but didn't necessarily want to install it. You know, the it's nice that it has a browser app, and sometimes it's just easier to start working right in it. But I find that the app also doesn't require me to sign in and out as much. It's a little better at just like keeping me signed in and not having to lose my accounts all the time and find them again.
I
So-
found my ranked choice voting. It's in there now.
Nice.
I must have saved my password automatically, so I didn't have to go find it.
Is there a problem if I sign in with two different accounts? Like one is MC Huntington and One Pair States, and the other one is MC Huntington at gmail.com. Am I going to get the thing confused?
So basically, if you're signed into two different Slacks with two different emails, if you sign in the future, it basically will complicate your sign in a little bit because you might have to do the sign in process twice. Whereas if you use the same email address, it'll kind of streamline that process and maybe only make you type your password in once.
Okay.
But it's not essential. It doesn't really matter. Once you're signed in, your experience should be the same.
Okay. Thank you.
So Andre, are you using the paid version or are you just doing the free version?
So I don't know. That's not something that I was involved in setting up. My guess is that we're on the free version. As far as I know, we're on the free version. I know we are for Trello. Yeah, at some point, I believe, and maybe Georgia knows more about this, but basically, at a certain size of organization, I think you have to start paying for Slack. But
I was thinking it was something like if you had more than 10 channels, but then I was thinking that no, maybe it was if you had more than 10, whatever they are, browsers or whatever, 10 servers, I think you called it, 10 servers. Like if you had 10 different organizations that you belong to, but maybe, but you have more than 10.
Well, these aren't all mine, right? So these
Wait,
are
how-
all other people's servers. I do have one. So I have my own free server. But I only have one.
So
Whole
what's the difference between
Washington
yours and somebody else's? So whole Washington
is one
has,
that I've been added to, but
oh, okay. So if you've been added to it, it doesn't count toward yours for the free.
correct.
I don't think that's how it works. I think that you get charged if you want to store your messages if you have more than 10,000 messages. That's one of the ways that they charge you for the pro account, is if you want to save data for longer than a certain amount of time and a certain amount of messages.
Okay. Now, most of the messages that are on here are not things you necessarily need to save. Like some of them are time specific, and after the event's gone by, you don't really need it necessarily. But are some things that you would want to save and you can take it out of Slack and put it on your computer?
So, oh, go ahead.
We've never even had remotely the desire to upgrade to pro, and it's because we don't use it enough that our messages get deleted in the amount of time that we'd still be referencing them. So it hasn't been an issue for us yet. Now, if we grow and people are using this a lot more often, we might have to upgrade just so that people aren't losing messages in one channel because we've gone over our 10,000 limit. So, But it's not
Okay.
been an issue for us, and I don't think it'll be an issue for One Pair States anytime
Yeah.
soon.
One thing I would say is, the type of communication should be sort of, you should be having the right type of communication on the platform for that type of communication. And so while you can talk, you can keep information that's important in Slack, it's not going to stop you from doing that. I would tend to organize my thinking as Slack is the place for sort of impermanent conversations that I don't expect to, and anything that comes out of that conversation that feels like it's important enough to archive, I would say that now it needs to be moved into some other kind of platform that is for long-term, archived information like Google Drive or something like that. So that's like, it's a kind of conceptual thing, but it also can help people understand where should I, like there's a lot of the times people wonder when these organizations have multiple tools, they start to wonder, where should I put this certain thing? And I try to help people understand that there are certain types of tools that are more appropriate for certain types of data. And that can help you understand where you might, it might not be super intuitive, but like that's fundamentally the line of thinking that leads to the answer to the question.
So, Andre, if you had something on the screen share they're showing us, and you wanted to save it to an archive, can you kind of do a few moves, show us what you would do to save it?
Yeah, well, in order to save it, it depends on what it is, and it's a little hard to like, kind of contrive something. But what I would basically say is, if I was having a conversation in one of these channels, right, and I'm saying like, hey, outreach people, I think we need to organize a hashtag campaign that goes out next week, right? And everyone agrees, yeah, good idea. We talk about the details, right? All of that information is now in Slack, but where it really needs to be is in Trello, right? Because Trello is where we say, okay, we all agreed that this needs to be done. Here's the explanation. I'm putting it in the doing column so people know that I'm the one who's doing it, right? So basically that's how you would archive that, right? Is you might have the conversation about how this thing needs to be done, but until it's been entered into the project management tool and somebody has said like, this is what we're doing it, and I'm the person who's doing it, right? It kind of,
Doesn't get done.
right, it doesn't exist to anyone else who wasn't a part of that conversation,
Can you
right?
do
So
a mock archive for us?
yeah, sure. So I don't want to like spam this room because because we actually use it. But what I would say is, if we were to have a conversation in this outreach room about that hashtag campaign, I could say, okay, I'll add it to the Trello, right? And that might be something that I make sure that I tell the people I'm talking to, right? It's like, okay,
There's a message down there.
what was that?
You would just make that as a message to everyone. I'm putting this
Yeah.
conversation or the action items into.
Okay, I'll add that to Trello,
Okay.
right? So
Got it.
now I would maybe click this because this is the outreach Trello. So it takes me here, and now I would say add another card, right? And I would be like hashtag campaign. And now that I'm on Trello, I'll say, okay, I'm taking that. So I've added myself to it, and I'm adding a due date. We're doing this like, by the 15th. And make sure, I'll do it as a checklist, like get a list of participants, get a list of hashtags, schedule the tweet storm, right?
Oh, good. Thank you.
So if you were in a conversation with somebody on outreach, and somebody said, oh, here's a link to an event like what I'm describing or something, or that I think we might want to do in the future or something like that. And that link is something that somebody might want to store as a reference, like someday we might want to do an event like that, so let's not forget about it. So since it's going to get lost from here when you get to a certain time, where do you, like, you just copy and paste that and put it in some Google document of resources somewhere else or something? Is it, okay.
Yep.
So when you're doing it, you have to remember, because you won't be able to find it later.
Yeah, and I basically think that, like, if there are three sort of, like, the way that I think of it at Whole Washington is we have sort of three big hubs of our organization, right? One is Slack, one is Trello, and the other one is Google Drive. And they're in various states of like organization, but basically I think that everyone should, like, they fulfill three pretty major needs, right? There's like Slack, which is just for really, really fast conversation. Trello, which is a little bit, it's dynamic still and it's pretty fluid. So I don't think of Trello as a place for like really permanent stuff, but it's like more long-term than Slack. And then Google Drive, which is like, this is where we put resources that we come back to all the time. This is where stuff that, is relevant in the long term goes. And there's a whole organizational system in there. And, some of that stuff becomes dated as well. But that's sort of the like fast, medium, slow is with those three tools. And so I tend to think that like everyone should know that it should go into one of those tools. And I think three is also a manageable number, and they're tools that people are pretty comfortable with. Increasingly, people are getting comfortable with them. So yeah, I don't necessarily like adding more tools usually doesn't solve the problem. There's always a balance, and that's a balance that's worked well for me.
That helps a lot. Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt you, Betty, but Catherine and Caroline, do you have any questions too? You've been pretty quiet. I want to make sure that any questions that you have get answered.
Thank you. I guess I'm just wondering, like, we touched on if you have another log on, like another account for work or something, if that's going to freak the system out. And I don't know, I guess you just kind of have to log out and log back in using a different ID and sign on and stuff. I'm thinking I'll figure that out as I go along. But I haven't used Slack a lot. I mean, quite frankly, I have not had a good experience with it. It's sort of been, diarrhea of the conversation. It's just like people drone on and on about utterly pointless things, and it's hard to find anything useful whatsoever. And I that's clearly a user issue more than the tool itself. So that's my biggest sort of philosophical barrier that I hurdle that I have to get over with using it.
I can help with that a little bit. So that's definitely a common experience, and it's something that I think it's an organizational challenge, because for some people it's a strength. It's a way for them to feel easily engaged with an organization. Is like, you know what, I don't make it to all the meetings, right? I don't always have time, but I sometimes like talking to people, right? And it just keeps me connected to people at the organization. So what I tend to recommend is you create like a chit chat channel, right?
Yeah.
A channel that's intentionally supposed to be for like, this
Small
is
talk.
where you can like, yeah, small talk, put Twitter stuff in here, whatever. And then try to make these sub channels more clearly focused and more targeted towards the people who are like really involved in the work they're really doing. And so the more definite give your structure and your organization. And the more you can communicate that to the organization, you say organizational discipline to tell people like, hey, please keep that kind of thing in the chit chat channel,
Right.
right? We should be thinking about this at some level as a, we should be courteous to our fellow volunteers and organizers by really thinking about the sort of informational load that we're putting on them when we try to collaborate with them. Like, obviously we need to collaborate, but we should be doing everything we can to be clear with our communication, to not create more work for each other, and to not like bombard each other with information that's not relevant to the person that we're talking to, because that does burn people out. So I hope that like by having more understanding of how these tools work and how we can be organized with them, more we can make that less of a problem, because it's I don't like to say error. I studied user experience, and I don't think that it really should be down to users to figure out how to make these things work for them. So I think of it as an organizational issue. We need to decide what kind of organization we're building and how that works, and then how we use the tools to make that work.
Yeah. That makes
Can I
sense.
add in there also that you can actually log in and see all of your workplaces on the left. And so you can transition easily between different workplaces. So I'm a member of several Slack channels, and you don't have to log out, to use one Slack channel and log back in to use another. You can just set it up so they're all accessible and just switch between.
And you can also mute channels and change the notification settings. So I can talk about that a little bit. So if we look at like this project management channel, this is a very noisy channel, and most of it's probably not relevant. So one thing you can do is you could just mute it completely. And I don't know if it really, so it's in a slightly more faded color, which shows that. It's a little hard to tell, it's subtle, but that's how you know it's muted. But the other thing that you can do is you can change the notification. And so now this is basically saying, this is if a channel that you want to get every notification. There are very few channels that I'm in that have that setting. And then this is completely turning the notification off. But then this one allows you to say, if somebody specifically tags me, give me a notification. And then there's also the channel in here. So those are different kinds of tags. So for people
what?
here. So I don't know actually what here is. Maybe it's the same as channel, but so
I can answer that. It's anybody who is in the channel currently live, like not logged out, not asleep.
okay, yeah. So basically, if I was, for instance, like the one of the main outreach coordinators, I might have like a daily update, right, where I go here or channel and say like today's daily announcement, right? That would be a good use for that tag. But yeah, like you can always direct message people, but sometimes like I'll like let's say there's this outreach thing and I'm working directly with like Georgia and Jen, right? I might say like, hey, Georgia and Jen, are we doing Slack training tonight, right? That way it's like they're in the channel. I don't know what their notification settings for the channel are, but this is like basically adding an additional importance, right, to the message, trying to make sure they get a notification so that they know that I'm trying to reach them in this channel. So that's like just another way that we can like more directly curate who we're talking to, try to give the notifications to the right people, try to not spam everybody for something that's only relevant to a few people, is to understand how to use tags and to use them when appropriate.
So just so everybody knows, it's 6:58 and our whole Washington General meeting starts at 7 p.m. So anybody who's joined the meeting for the general meeting, we're just kind of wrapping up a Slack training here, so that's what you're hearing. But we are wrapping it up, and anybody who is on the Slack training who wants to stay for the whole Washington General Meeting is more than welcome to do so. We'd love to have you from One Pair States and any other organization, but we're going to probably need to wrap it up pretty quickly here. So appreciate you coming. If you have any like last minute questions that are real quick, maybe we need to do a follow-up Slack training because it seems like there's a lot to cover.
I just wondered for both of you, do you keep important documents for each project, just say on Google Drive, or do you also save it on your computer?
I usually keep it in Google Drive. There are some documents where I keep a downloaded copy just so it's really easy and fast for me to share, like a PDF of it. But I don't consider that I don't consider my computer to be where the document is stored. It's stored in Google Drive. I'm just using it on my computer.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Andre. That was really, really helpful.
Yep. And I'm happy to do another, and I'm happy to continue working on that document if any of you have questions. As you know, I'm on Slack, so you can ask me there. Yeah, I hope that I've helped you all use the tool a bit better and feel a little bit more confident with your organizing.
Thank you.